5-year-old Robin Williams stood in the doorway of his mother's bedroom watching her get ready for another luncheon. She was beautiful, elegant, always busy. He'd been alone in the attic all day playing with toy soldiers, giving them different voices, creating entire worlds just to pass the time. He wanted her to notice him, just once. So he did a silly impression, some voice he'd invented, a character with a funny accent. His mother turned, looked at him, and laughed. For a moment, Robin felt like he existed. Then she said 7 words that would program his entire life. "That's the only time you're interesting." Robin's 5-year-old brain locked onto a devastating equation. Love equals performance. Stop performing, stop existing. For the next 63 years, Robin Williams became the fastest, funniest, most exhausting performer in history, terrified that if he stopped being on, he would disappear. And in his final weeks, during his last conversation with his mother, Robin asked her one question he'd been too afraid to ask his entire life. Her answer revealed whether he'd ever succeeded in proving her wrong, or if he'd spent 63 years chasing something impossible. 1956, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. The Williams family mansion had 40 rooms of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and crushing silence. Robin's father, Robert, was a senior executive at Ford Motor Company, always traveling, always working. His mother, Lori, was a former model, sharp-witted, sarcastic, stunningly beautiful, who filled her days with country club luncheons and charity events. And Robin, their only child born late in their lives, was alone. The family rule was simple and absolute. Children should be seen, not heard. So Robin learned to be quiet. He'd spend entire days in the attic, the only place that felt like his, surrounded by thousands of toy soldiers. He'd arrange them in elaborate battle formations, create entire wars, and give each soldier a different voice. German commanders, British officers, Southern cowboys, Russian spies. He wasn't just playing, he was building a population inside his head because the real world around him was empty. His mother fascinated him. Lori Williams was unlike other mothers in 1950s suburban Michigan. She was funny, genuinely funny, with a razor-sharp wit that could cut through any conversation. She'd make sarcastic comments about their neighbors that would make Robin's father chuckle. She'd do impressions of people at her club that were devastatingly accurate. Robin would listen from the hallway, mesmerized. His mother had this gift. She could make people laugh. And when she laughed, she was radiant. But that laughter, that attention, was never directed at him. Most days, Lori barely acknowledged Robin's existence. She'd sweep past him in the hallway, a blur of perfume and purpose, always heading somewhere else. Robin would try to engage her. "Mom, look what I built. Mom, can we do something together? Mom, watch this." She'd nod absently, distracted, already thinking about her next engagement. The message was clear. You're not interesting enough to hold my attention. But on this particular afternoon in 1956, something changed. Robin had been in the attic for hours performing entire scenes with his toy soldiers, doing voices, making himself laugh. And he'd perfected a new character, some combination of a French chef and a British butler, ridiculous and silly. He thought maybe, just maybe, if he showed his mother, she might laugh. She might finally see him. He found her in her bedroom, sitting at her vanity, applying lipstick in the mirror. She was getting ready for another luncheon. Robin stood in the doorway, his heart pounding. He cleared his throat. "Mom?" She glanced at him in the mirror. "Yes, dear." "I want to show you something." "I'm in a bit of a hurry, Robin." But he was already committed. He launched into the character, the French-British butler voice, complete with exaggerated mannerisms, silly physical comedy. "Madame, your luncheon awaits, but first we must discuss the very important matter of the soup spoons." Lori turned from the mirror. She looked at him fully for the first time in days, and she laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Robin's entire body lit up. This was it. This was the feeling he'd been chasing. His mother's attention, her approval. For 30 glorious seconds, Robin Williams existed in his mother's world. Then Lori turned back to the mirror, touching up her lipstick. She said it casually, without malice, just a throwaway comment. "That's the only time you're interesting." 7 words, She probably forgot them the moment she left for her luncheon, but Robin's 5-year-old brain captured them like a photograph. That's the only time you're interesting. Not, that was funny. Not, you're talented. The only time. The implication was clear. The rest of the time, when he was just Robin, when he was just being himself, he was boring, worthless, invisible. In that moment, Robin's developing mind created an equation that would govern the next 63 years of his life. Love equals performance. Attention equals entertainment. If you stop being funny, you stop existing. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a survival mechanism. His brain, desperate for maternal love, found the formula. Make her laugh. Make everyone laugh. Never stop, because stopping means disappearing. From that day forward, Robin Williams was always on. At dinner, he'd do characters, and at school, he'd entertain classmates. At family gatherings, he'd perform. His mother would smile approvingly when he made her friends laugh. That smile became his drug. He'd do anything to see it, anything to prove that he was interesting, that he was worth noticing, that he deserved to exist in her presence. But here's the cruel irony. The more Robin performed, the less he knew how to just be. The character voices weren't just entertainment. They were armor, a way to fill the silence that terrified him, because silence meant being alone with the truth. He still didn't know if his mother loved him for who he was or for what he could do. By the time Robin reached high school, he'd perfected the art of being everything to everyone: class clown, entertainer, the kid who could make anyone laugh. But late at night, alone in his room, the performance would stop. And in those quiet moments, he'd feel it, the bottomless pit of inadequacy. Am I interesting now? What about now? The questions never stopped. His mother remained his toughest audience. Lori Williams would sometimes watch Robin perform at school plays or talent shows, and she'd have notes, critiques. That joke didn't land. You were trying too hard. She was training him, though she probably didn't realize it. Training him to be funnier, faster, more desperate for approval. And Robin absorbed every note because he still believed that if he got good enough, if he performed well enough, she'd finally say the words he needed to hear. You're interesting just as you are. When Robin went to Juilliard in 1973, his teacher, John Houseman, called him Little Fool Ferret Boy, a term that captured Robin's manic, uncontrollable energy. He couldn't sit still, couldn't stop doing voices. Even in serious, dramatic scenes, he'd improvise, add characters, do anything to keep moving. His classmate, Christopher Reeve, once asked him, "Don't you ever just relax, just be still?" Robin looked at him like he'd suggested stopping breathing. "If I stop, people get bored. If they get bored, I disappear," Reeve pressed him. "Who told you that?" Robin shrugged. "Nobody had to tell me. I just know." But that wasn't true. Someone had told him. His mother, when he was 5 years old, with 7 words that became the operating system of his entire personality. Robin's career exploded. Mork and Mindy made him famous. His stand-up was legendary, 3-hour sets where he'd perform 50 different characters without stopping. Movies, awards, acclaim, but people close to him noticed something disturbing. Robin couldn't turn off. On movie sets, between takes, he'd entertain the crew. At restaurants, he'd perform for nearby tables. At home, even with his wife, he'd still be doing bits, voices, characters. His first wife, Valerie, once said, "I've been married to Robin for 5 years, and I'm still not sure I've met him." Because Robin didn't know who him was. The performance had become so complete, so constant, that the real person underneath, if there even was one, had been buried decades ago under layers of character work and desperate approval-seeking. His friends tried to help. Christopher Reeve, his closest friend from Juilliard, would sometimes grab Robin's shoulders and say, "Stop. Just stop for a second. You don't have to perform for me." And Robin would try. He'd be quiet for maybe 30 seconds. Then he'd feel it rising, the panic, the fear, the voice of his mother in his head. "That's the only time you're interesting." And he'd launch into another bit, another character, anything to fill the silence that felt like death. In the 1980s, Robin developed a cocaine addiction. It wasn't recreational, it was fuel. A way to keep the performance going when his body wanted to stop. Cocaine made him faster, funnier, more manic. It let him keep running from the silence. When his friend John Belushi died from an overdose in 1982, Robin quit cold turkey, not because he finally found peace, but because he realized that dying would be the ultimate form of disappearing, and he was still trying to prove he was interesting enough to exist. He went to therapy, multiple therapists over multiple decades. They tried to dig into his childhood, find the source of his compulsive performing. Robin would talk about his lonely childhood, the big empty house, the absent father. But he rarely mentioned the 7 words. Not because he'd forgotten them, because saying them out loud would make them real, would force him to confront the possibility that his entire life was built on trying to disprove a casual comment his mother made when he was 5 years old. One therapist finally got close. In 2003, during a session after Robin had relapsed into drinking, the therapist asked, "When did you learn that you weren't enough, just as yourself?" Robin went quiet. For once, genuinely quiet. Then he said, I was 5. My mom said something. It doesn't matter, the therapist pressed. What did she say? Robin shook his head. It doesn't matter because I proved her wrong. I'm interesting. I've made millions of people laugh. I've won awards. I proved her wrong. But his voice cracked when he said it because he didn't believe it. Proving the whole world wrong didn't matter if he couldn't prove it to the one person whose opinion formed him. Through all of this, Lori Williams watched her son's career with pride. She'd attend his movie premieres, accept accolades on his behalf when he couldn't make events. Tell people at her club that, yes, that's her Robin on television. She thought she'd done well, raised a successful, talented son. She didn't remember a comment from 1956, didn't know that 7 words she tossed off while getting ready for a luncheon had created both her son's greatest gift and his deepest wound. By 2014, Robin Williams was dying, not from age, not from his old addictions, from something far crueler. Lewy body dementia was destroying his brain, cell by cell. He was hallucinating, forgetting, losing time, convinced he was going insane. He couldn't remember lines on set, couldn't sleep, would wake up screaming from nightmares where his mind was being erased. The fastest brain in comedy was short-circuiting, and Robin could feel every moment of it. His wife Susan watched him disappear. The man who'd spent 63 years performing was finally, involuntarily stopping. And what emerged wasn't peace. It was terror. Because without the performance, without the characters and voices and constant entertainment, Robin didn't know who he was. The silence he'd spent his entire life running from had finally caught him. In late July 2014, 3 weeks before he died, Robin made a phone call. His hands were shaking. From the disease, from fear. He called his mother. Lori was 90 years old now, living in San Francisco, her memory sharp despite her age. She was surprised to hear from Robin. He didn't call often. When he did, he was usually on, performing even over the phone, making her laugh. But not today. "Mom, I need to ask you something." "Of course, dear, what is it?" Robin's voice cracked. "When I was little, when I was 5, I did an impression for you. You laughed. Do you remember?" Lori thought for a moment. "Darling, you did impressions constantly. You were always performing. I can't remember one specific. This one was different. You were getting ready for a luncheon. I did some character, French butler or something. You laughed. And then you said something to me." There was silence on the line. "What did I say?" Robin closed his eyes. He was 63 years old, dying, and he was about to ask the question he'd been too terrified to ask his entire life. "You said, 'That's the only time you're interesting.' Do you remember saying that?" The silence stretched. Finally, Lori spoke, her voice small. "I said that?" "You did." "Robin, She paused. "I don't remember saying it, but it sounds like something I might have said. I was always rushing off to some event. I probably said a lot of thoughtless things." Her voice wavered. "Did that hurt you?" Robin laughed, but it was hollow. "Mom, I've spent 63 years trying to prove you wrong. Trying to be interesting enough, performing every second of every day because I learned that day that if I stopped being funny, I'd stop mattering. So, yeah, it hurt." Lori Williams started crying. At 90 years old, realizing what she'd done. "Robin, I'm so sorry. You were always interesting. You were brilliant. You were my son. You didn't need to perform for me. I'm so sorry I made you think that." "Did you mean it?" Robin's voice was barely a whisper. "That day. Did you mean it?" "No." God, no, I was being sarcastic. It was just something I said. I didn't think—" She was sobbing now. "I didn't think you'd remember. I didn't think it would matter so much." "It was everything," Robin said quietly. "It became my whole life. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You were always enough, Robin, just as you were. I wish I'd told you that. I wish I'd shown you that." Robin sat with that for a long moment. His mother was apologizing, saying the words he'd needed to hear for 63 years. But here's the cruel truth. It was too late. The damage was done. The pattern was set. Hearing the words now, at 63, dying from a disease eating his brain, couldn't undo 63 years of programming, couldn't erase the desperate performer he'd become, couldn't silence the voice in his head that still whispered, "You're only interesting when you perform." "I love you, Mom," Robin said. "I love you too, sweetheart. Just as you are, I always have." They talked for a few more minutes. Lori tried to tell him stories about how proud she'd always been, how she'd bragged to everyone about her talented son. Robin listened. When he hung up, he sat in his office for an hour, staring at nothing. Susan found him there. "How'd it go?" Robin looked at her, his eyes wet. "She apologized. Said she didn't mean it, said I was always enough." "That's good, right? That's what you needed to hear." Robin shook his head slowly. "I needed to hear it when I was 5. I needed to hear it when I was 10, 20, 30. I needed to hear it every year I spent killing myself trying to prove I was interesting." He looked at Susan. "Hearing it now, it doesn't change what I became. It doesn't give me back the person I might have been if I'd just been allowed to be boring sometimes." 2 weeks later, Robin Williams was found dead. Suicide. The Lewy body dementia had become unbearable, but it wasn't just the disease that killed him. It was 63 years of running, of performing, of never being allowed to rest, of building an entire identity on being interesting, being funny, being anything except the quiet, possibly boring, but wholly human person he might have been if 7 words hadn't programmed him differently. At Robin's memorial service, Lori Williams sat in the front row, barely holding herself together. She kept whispering to the person next to her, "I did this. I said those words. I didn't know. I didn't know." People tried to comfort her, telling her it wasn't her fault, that Robin's demons were complex and old, but Lori knew the truth. She'd planted the seed. One casual comment, said without thinking, had grown into a tree that eventually collapsed under its own weight. After the service, Susan Williams found a note in Robin's office. It was written in his handwriting, shaky from the tremors caused by his disease. It said, "I finally asked Mom about the 7 words. She said she didn't mean them. She said I was always enough. I believe she believes that, but I spent 63 years not believing it, and now it's too late to learn how to just be. I only know how to perform, and I'm so tired of performing I just want to rest." Today, the lesson of Robin Williams isn't about how laughter can mask pain. Everyone knows that. The lesson is about how careless words spoken to children can program their entire lives, how a 5-year-old brain, desperate for parental approval, will build entire personalities around earning love, how performing can become so automatic that the real person underneath forgets how to exist. Despite everything, despite the tragedy, Robin Williams' legacy remains extraordinary. He touched millions of lives, made countless people laugh during their darkest times, visited soldiers, sick children, anyone who needed joy. But the sad truth is this: he spent his entire life trying to prove he was interesting to one person who'd said 7 words without thinking. And by the time she finally told him he'd always been enough, he was too broken to believe it. If this story about the weight of words, the cost of conditional love, and the price of a lifetime spent performing moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're enough exactly as they are, without performing, without proving, without earning it. Have you ever had words spoken to you that changed how you see yourself? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more stories about the hidden costs of fame, the power of childhood wounds, and why the funniest people are often fighting the hardest battles.